Why? They live in a Jewish milieu, in a Jewish land. It's occupied by Roman power, but it's still a Jewish society. But moreover, Joseph has a line of descent. And we hear that in the Gospel of Matthew, of the house and lineage of David. So does Jesus on Mary's side as well, which is interesting, but would be the male line that would push this. And notice, again, go back to the business of the marriage, how Joseph, this is perhaps not even obvious to Jesus in his early years, but Joseph has stepped back from that. But he certainly would still have treasured it. And that the fact that Jesus has this kind of connection to the long royal line of Israel, and that means the relationship that God has with his people, this is something that Joseph would have made for certain part of the education of the young Jesus of Nazareth. We've already talked about Christ and the techne, the carpenter life, and then there are all the lessons that a lad has to learn from his father in terms of manhood: responsibility, integrity, honesty, loyalty, duty, and generosity. And Joseph would have had all of those things. Should point out also that the scriptures, we're kind of going at this a little backwards. We will do a session on this Joseph in the scriptures. But one of the things that's very interesting is that Joseph in the Gospel of Matthew is given the authority to name Jesus. In Luke, it's Mary who says the word, the name is, but in Joseph. So Matthew and Luke are giving us the truth, but from different perspectives and different points of view. But in Matthew we find that, and it is a very powerful thing to see that Joseph is given the power to name Jesus. And then it's worth remembering that in his own life, St. Joseph focuses on Jesus himself and the mystery of who Jesus is. This too is part of the spirituality of it. There were many things in the first century Palestine, first century Israel, that Joseph might have been preoccupied with. He is politically aware because he's of the house of David. He's aware of more than dozens of people claiming to be messiahs. He's aware of dozens of people who are zealots, who want to throw off the Roman occupation. He's aware of the divisions within the Jewish people, unfortunately. The Sadducees who want to accommodate Jewish faith with their occupiers, as they did with the Alexandrians. The Pharisees who want to step back from an involvement with the society that Rome has imposed. The Essenes who want to go out into the desert and live a kind of monastic life. Very interesting segment there. So all of that is a sense of Joseph occupying the role of father and being the shadow of the father. He is not the father. He is the shadow of the Father. And you notice, if you think about your shadow, this shadow can have a negative term, and I certainly don't mean this, and this is not my language. This is Dukowski, I think is the name of the guy. He's a Polish spiritual writer who has popularized this recent image of Joseph as the shadow of the Father. But on a very positive thing, are you ever without your shadow? No, as long as you live in the flesh, you live with your shadow, okay? We might say the dark side, we also have our shadow side, we have that too. But I just mean this, you have to remember too, in Israel with the sun bearing down on you all the time, the idea of a shadow is a very positive thing because it gives relief, it gives comfort, it gives a time of rest and healing. And that's the way maybe we should think of Joseph in the sense of the shadow of the Father. Joseph's privileged relationship with Mary is, of course, yet another thing worth our discussion. God is always for her and by her, and therefore Joseph has a share in that. You know the famous story of the suitors, the many suitors who wanted to marry the young Mary of Nazareth, and Joseph is summoned, and he comes too. They all have their walking sticks. If you've seen Barbara Miles with her big walking stick, they all have these kind of staffs to get around, and as they're there, you know, saying, well, I would be a great husband for this beautiful young woman, or I would be. Joseph is the most humble, and then they are invited to put them down. And as Joseph is going down, it blooms, full of lilies. And so it's seen as the sign that God has chosen him for Mary. And of course, we have Joseph's as I mentioned earlier, the revelation of the pregnancy of Mary and the test that put Joseph through. And notice his instinct is still to protect her, and as soon as the truth is revealed, he comes right back to stand by her side. Notice also, as I mentioned earlier, that they may not have a sexual union, but they have the deepest of intimacies. And we live in a society, sad to say, where we do not realize how powerful intimacy can be in ways other than sexual. And so no dismissal of that, but recognizing that in the case of Joseph and Mary, it was a pure and chaste kind of union. Another thing we might want to talk about would be some of the challenges that St. Joseph faced, and the birth, the exile, the loss of the child, the many trips, the education and the training. All of this is stuff that is testing him, but also drawing him ever more deeply into an intimate union with Mary, who shares in that same anxiety. So mutual suffering, get rendered in love, is a very unifying kind of thing for people. I think we all know that. And then finally, the death of Joseph himself is a beautiful moment. For Joseph dies, as we all would like to go to the Lord, in the arms of Jesus and Mary. So a beautiful moment of passing from this life. What Jesus, or in a sense what Joseph experiences at the end of his earthly life, becomes the opening to his eternal life. He will find, in a way, the same reality on the other side. He'll have to wait a little bit for it, but he will discover it, that life with Jesus and Mary is what heaven is all about. In terms of the life of Joseph, his own key spiritual moments, we've pretty well gone over all of those, but I just point them out. The betrothal to Mary, what a beautiful thing. The seeming betrayal, and yet the discovery that there was no betrayal. There was loyalty to God, not betrayal to man. The birth of Jesus, think about that. What a powerful thing. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the Eastern icons. They annoy me. I love the icons of the East, but there's one, the nativity icon, that annoys me. And if you can find St. Joseph, you're doing better, man, than I am, Gunga Din. But he's usually located down in the corner. And he has there's usually a little demon-type person confronting him. Does you remember this? Does any of you know this? And the demon is trying to sow doubts into Joseph's mind about the paternity of the child. But Joseph still sits there by the fire, waiting for the birth. Now, more modern representations of the birth often show Joseph right there at the birth, kind of assisting as best he can. And then when Mary is spent, so to speak, from exhaustion, it is Joseph who holds the newborn infant child. So I prefer to think of the more modern ones. But as always is the case with the Byzantine tradition, they make you think. There's a point to that. And they also isolate Joseph because they want to emphasize the only source of paternity for Mary is the overshadowing of the Spirit sent by the Father. So important point there in the ark. We might ask ourselves a little bit about who looks to Joseph, who loves Joseph, who are the people who are his devotees. And just as it's not an exhaustive list, but husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, children, in-laws, workers, carpenters, the sick, the possessed, refugees, problem pregnancies, families and family life, virgins, religious, monks and nuns, the sellers of homes, Canada, many dioceses, including this one in Manchester, New Hampshire, Austria, Belgium, Cambodia, Croatia. Croatia is a very particular one to me because their two patrons are Joseph and Jerome. So I'll just leave it at that. Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country in the world, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Russia, Slovenia, and Vietnam. So it's kind of a lot of people looking to St. Joseph. This is just by way of a kind of an overview of how Joseph affects the spirituality of people. Everything from the people who are desperate to sell a home will buy a plastic statue of St. Joseph, dig a little hole in the backyard and put him in the hopes that they will sell their house. And those who get annoyed with St. Joseph when their house doesn't sell will dig him back up and put him in upside down. They're lucky they don't get some kind of a thunderbolt, but there's that level. And there are people who pray to Joseph every single day. There are people who dedicate their lives to Christ, but through the prism of St. Joseph. The Josephites, a religious order of priests who serve in the missions in the Black and Indian missions in the South and in the West. The Sisters of St. Joseph, the Congregation of St. Joseph, tremendous educators throughout New England. Not so many here in New Hampshire, but there's certainly many other places in New England. Joseph is a way for us to see how the life of Christ can come into a life, shape the life, and then transform that life so that that life in turn affects and shapes others. So that's what spirituality in large part is about. It's about how do we make, in God's grace, of course, because it's all God's efforts, how do we have an encounter with Christ? We have an encounter with Christ in our time through the people he sends into our lives, right? Whether they are heavenly people, heavenly figures, like Mary, like Joseph, like John the Baptist, like any of the saints, the angels, St. Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, all the angels, and then the people that we actually encounter. And it's what we do then with that encounter. How do we remember it? How do we practice it? How do we nurture it in our lives? And so spirituality is always important. We talk about it a lot in Lent, but it's always important because it's the way we keep the fire burning. Remember in the old days when, well, I wasn't around for it, and we never had a fireplace, unfortunately, but they had the bellows and you had to pump the fire and make sure that it stayed going. You kept the embers glowing. Spirituality is one of the ways that we are able to keep the glowing embers of our faith and of our love of God. So Joseph is, for my money, one of the key components for that. Obviously, St. Benedict is a huge important part of that in my life too. There's more than a little bit of connection between Benedict's vision of the gospel and the life of St. Joseph. He doesn't speak about Joseph, doesn't really speak about our Blessed Mother either in any great detail. It's all Christocentric. But if you read the rule carefully, you can see where the influence of the figure of Joseph is easily found. Certainly the esteem that Benedict has for work, he sees it as a way of sanctifying one's life. That was Joseph's attitude. Benedict and Joseph both are patrons of a happy death. Joseph having experienced that happy death literally in the arms of Jesus, and Benedict having experienced that through the prayer and the presence of the community and the presence of the Eucharist. So some interesting things. So any questions? We have come to the end of our hour, brothers and sisters. We thank you. Our next gathering will be, let me just tell you, this may be for anybody who's online, reminder who didn't have or doesn't have access to our program, will be March 4th. So what is that? Is that a week from now? It's on Thursday, March 4th, and we'll be doing Vespers and Joseph and the sacraments. Now, there's another kind of thing, because somebody might say, well, Jesus hadn't invented the sacraments and Joseph had already gone home to the Lord. True enough, but is there a connection between Joseph and the sacraments? Yes. Why? Because there's a connection between Joseph and Jesus. So we'll see how that works. I thank you for your things. We wish you all a very good night, safe home, and bring some friends to the next one. Okay? See you later. Bye-bye. Thank you.